Welcome to the Sheth Leadership Academy lecture series, where Professor Jagdish Sheth, author of numerous marketing and management books such as The Rule of Three and Chindia Rising, delves into a variety of topics. This lecture is titled How to Become a Trusted Advisor, where Professor Sheth not only talks about how to become a trusted advisor, but why it's important. This presentation is narrated by Professor Sheth. Please enjoy.
Become a trusted advisor. This is a topic that I got very intrigued many years ago, actually, when I began to read biographies of world-class advisors. In the old days, kings used to have great advisors. And in the Western civilization, we always talked about Aristotle and Plato as great advisors. And reading their biographies motivated me to figure out what makes a great advisor. We fast forward now in the 21st century, and I find that concept is becoming a lot more not only relevant but necessary, especially for professional services of firms as well as professionals themselves. If we just imagine what happened at the Industrial Revolution, when machines came and could substitute the craft people, the master guild under whom one became an intern for 7-8 years to learn the craft of making that precise product, whatever the product would be. And Master Guild, the person in charge, would basically say, there is no way machine can substitute human beings, but it happened. Actually, factories ended up making more replicable products under the same quality assurance than what humans could do. So we automated the factory workers. Fast forward a little more. And now in the 70s, we began to automate clerical workers. I remember as a department head of a large department, I had 11 secretaries in my steno pool, and they used to primarily do, in my days, what we will call mimeographs. This was a machine, blue stencils. All the exams will be typed just the day before the exam, especially in accounting, where there was a lot of stealing and cheating that took place by students. Fascinating. Today, we don't have steno pools. There is no personal dictation where somebody took a shorthand. Word processors came, and automation of clerical work took place. As clerical work is more higher wage compared to the factory workers because of the level of education that you needed, my view is that we are all going to get more automated, especially with the rapid evolution of digital technology, which is both interactive as well as very affordable. It is a matter of time where many of the things we do, either as consultants or as lawyers or as accountants or as medical doctors, makes no difference. We are going to get more automated, which means that the traditional things that we did is not going to sustain itself. Most of that would be on the internet, for example. Many consultants, many trusted advisors, many experts for hires would collect information, gather information, provide back to the clients, etc. That just can be done now strictly on the net. I mean, I can do Google search and get more information today than ever before. We do have in the legal profession things such as Thomson Westlaw or LexisNexis, where all the case histories are digitized and available online. Somebody has to do search, but what you need is not gathering information, but what you need actually is getting insights out of those information, which is a very different category than what the experts generally do by and large. So this lecture is based upon the notion of what is going to happen to professional services organizations and professionals themselves, whether you are a financial advisor, you are a legal advisor, medical advisor, or a management advisor. My focus here is going to be a little more on the management side, but I think the principles we have discovered here are universally applicable. And by the way, they are not culture bound either. That's what I have found. Based on research that we have done, the same message transcends all cultures into this professional managerial class. So let's start the journey. Let me show you the first slide. The title of the presentation is called How to Become a Trusted Advisor. And the first slide really talks about the emerging bipolarity of client relationship. Experts for hire is where we are today, and we are going to get divided into two categories. Either many companies and individuals will become strictly vendors, which means you have to basically bid for contracts. You basically are price-driven mechanism. There's nothing wrong. You can make money that way so long as you have a low-cost position, which means many talented people in countries like India, which has a language advantage, or China eventually, where language may not be as critical like in IT services, services, it is very possible that work will flow to wherever there is a lower cost position. So one can become a vendor and still make money. I'm not going to talk about that side. I'm going to talk about how do we rise and become even more valuable, indispensable to a client, which is going from expert for hire as a journey to become a trusted advisor. So just as what happened to customer support, how many of you remember we used to have in the telephone industry telephone operators? There is even an actress, Lily Tomlin is her name, who became Ernestine, and she used to have all these jokes about a telephone operator. Very fascinating. Today, there are very few telephone operators, and the only ones are there are in case of an emergency, in case the machines can't do the work. In fact, same thing is happening whether those are airline, call centers or any call center primarily are all becoming primarily web-based online, interaction, including making reservations for your tickets, etc. So what happened to customer support, where there's a massive automation of the clerical frontline people, customer support organizations, it is likely to happen to professional services organizations. And that is the theme that I would like to talk about. Again, this chart that I have is primarily a chart that I have used in other presentations. It's such a strategic chart in my mind that if you take all your clients and plot them from left to right, from the largest client in terms of the revenue that the client generates, and if you wanted to, I can even make it a little more analytical by looking at the lifetime value of the client. In services, professional services, one thing good is that the way you engage with a client and get the assignment, the odds are enormous the client will stay with you for the rest of his or her life unless we make some mistakes, such as, for example, there's a reorganization in the company that impacts the client, such as, for example, if I am a bank and the bank merges with another bank, now the relationship is at jeopardy. If I am an agent selling auto insurance or life insurance, and again something happens in the policy, which means it is not the client who is constantly looking for change, they surrender their choice in all services, in all utilities, till we somehow mess it up over, which means lifetime value of a client is very important concept to measure, more so than for product company. So I can do that thing and find the client which is my biggest client on my left side of the x-axis, for example, and then continue on the right side with my smallest client. So you get this declining curve, which is typically 20-80 ratio. 20% of your clients will concentrate 80% of your revenue. We all know this stuff, and in any organizations, the salespeople are very aware of this. However, what we really don't do is to allocate our cost of doing business by client. We allocate our cost of doing business more by the offering, whatever it is, whether in the case of, let's say, a accounting firm, by the audit fees, tax advisory fees, strategy consulting that we do, whatever we do, we allocate our cost from that viewpoint, or we allocate our cost based upon our own internal procedures, primarily from the viewpoint of geography. So the offerings of the products or the services we offer, or the geographical base with which professional services are managed in general, would be the way we will allocate. What this recommends is slightly different. It says that somehow take the same cost of doing business but allocate account by account, client by client. And I must tell you, it's absolutely a revelation that most of the cost, that cost curve, which is a curve coming down slightly sloping, is gradually sloping down, whereas the revenue curve is very sharp, which says that 90% of your clients are being subsidized by 10% of your other clients. And this inherent cross subsidy is the biggest issue in professional services. Either the revenues must be in line with the cost, or the cost ought to be reallocated in a proper way, which leads to the idea that a non-traditional competitor will only select those low-hanging fruits, which are your best clients, because that's where the highest margins are. And they would probably not chase clients where you are not profitable. Just to show you the size of the power of this chart for professional services, I did an assessment for one large accounting firm on the audit side where we had 4,000 clients, and lo and behold, we put the activity-based costing, the technique that they actually sell to other companies on the strategy consulting side, and we put that same thing on the company, and we found that out of 4,000 clients worldwide, they were only profitable in less than 400 clients. But nobody had done this analysis. So this understanding and becoming more trusted advisor is more necessary, especially for your best clients. So how do you bond with them as trusted advisors? On the other side, clients that are perennially non-profitable, one should think more and more about outsourcing those clients. More and more professional services, whether those are banks or investment banking firms, accounting firms, legal firms, under tough economic times, are relooking their cost aspects and basically making a statement that if we will never be profitable with some clients, why are we in fact having them as our clients? Can we say goodbye in a positive way? This is not firing the clients. There is a concept like firing the clients. No, I'm advocating outsourcing the clients, which means you give those clients to somebody else who can manage them more profitably than you can do it, and you still have a relationship with the clients, but you are not doing the work. That's the argument. So let's go to the next page and talk about the study that I did. This is a study where the notion is not client satisfaction, which is what we measure, but does the client get a value from us? And without inherently getting value, clients will probably think about leaving the relationship. So in this particular case, who sees excellent value in their consultant was the question that we had raised. It's a very complicated technique. This is just the results out of that technique. So out of the total value that is out there, 48% of the clients claim they get value from their professional service provider, in this case consultants. But if you are labeled as a trusted advisor, it is 77%. On the other hand, if you are expert for hire, it is about 46%. And if you are labeled as a vendor primarily, it is down to 11%. So there is this belief system that as a vendor, clients don't see any value except the price or cost. Then you go up to expert for hire, but highest amount of customer value arises when the customer or the client begins to think that you are a trusted advisor. So here is the way we segmented the market. We defined the loyalist as those who are both completely satisfied, the top box, and those who are getting great value or excellent value. Those were the two words we used and classified. And loyalists are those clients who are getting great value and they're extremely satisfied. Contented believe one or the other. In other words, they are either getting value or they are satisfied but not both. And at risk are neither. At risk is 47% of the total client relationship, not a small number. Loyalists are about 31% and contented are about 22%. In other words, from the data, what we found somewhat surprising is that the largest amount of relationship is in jeopardy, and that is about half of the total client relationship in this particular case. And what are the issues where these clients who are at risk, what is it that they really worry about? So we created two categories: clients who are loyal. Remember, loyal means they are extremely satisfied as well as they get a great value, versus those who have neither of those statements in their mind. So clients who are at risk versus clients who are loyal, you can see the data, it clearly shows you, has the best interest of the client in my mind. It varies from 92% to 51%. Does everything possible to make us successful? This is the client perspective. 87% versus only 42%. Makes me look good. 85% versus 38%. It just goes on, and pretty much you can look at the rest of the data and show you that there's a significant difference in the perception that a client has about those who are labeled as trusted advisors versus those who are not trusted advisors. So what are the differences? We carried out another in-depth interview study with more than 30 large enterprise CEOs, multi-billion-dollar organizations across a diverse set of industries. And we began to ask them the difference between experts versus trusted advisors. We did the same thing, surprisingly, also with some of the best trusted advisors, what we call management gurus or executive coaches. And from that, we assessed and we found here are the key differences between experts versus advisors. Experts have the depth of knowledge. The advisors actually have the depth and the breadth of knowledge. In other words, advisors, trusted advisors, are more deep generalists. They are not just experts. Advisors like to listen a lot more so. Experts want to tell about their expertise. Clear difference that came out. Experts provide great answers. Advisors ask great questions. Experts develop professional trust. For my professional needs, I can go to the expert and he or she will give me the advice. Whereas trusted advisors rise above that and also develop not only professional but also personal trust. And we'll show you some data and actual quotes from people that we interviewed about the difference. Control versus collaborate. A typical expert simply says, I want to frame everything the way I think ought to be done, almost like selling the product, selling the offering, as opposed to here, the trusted advisor would like to collaborate with the client. In other words, we are in this together to create the offering actually, rather than I make an offering at this price and delivery and you accept it or we negotiate. Of course, experts provide expertise, whereas trusted advisors provide insights, which is far beyond just providing expertise, which is mostly descriptive. So if you're an accountant, you can say, here are the tax laws. And here are the do's and the don'ts from the tax authority viewpoint. But if you're a trusted advisors, they take a strategic view and say, why do you want to minimize the tax? Or what is your tax policy as a corporation or as an individual? Experts analyze the data, analyze your situation. They're very good at doing the analysis, whereas trusted advisors actually synthesize lots of knowledge is out there, and there are two different skill sets. I must tell you that many experts for hire have tried to become trusted advisors, and it's not easy journey. Just like many engineers cannot become good salespeople or actually leaders of organizations, I find the same thing here. Usually no more than 15 to 20% of the experts are able to rise to become trusted advisors. So the journey is difficult. It is doable. There is nothing about this like being born salesperson. I don't think it's an inherent trait problem. I think it's a learned behavior and conditioning. So in order to become expert for hire, one has to de-learn essentially or remove the way we have thought about ourselves as experts for hire. So let me show you the next slide. These are the client quotations. The real good professionals ask great questions. Often they enable solutions rather than supply them, which means best trusted advisors actually have the client discover their own solutions. You know, the relationship is almost like between a professor and a student. Very important to realize. Where the professor, by challenging the student, talking to the student, gets more things out of the student, and more importantly, the student believes that he provided or she provided the solution. Same idea here. The best business advisors have a good understanding of my industry, but also the breadth. Some of the best insights I often have got from professionals who bring analogies from other fields. In other words, great trusted advisors not simply are experts in their own field, but they are deep generalists and they connect the dot for you. So you may be in a manufacturing industry, let's say in the automobile, they may bring an example all the way from a utility company and show you the insights that they have learned from that and show you the through connected dot how it is relevant. Often the capital markets are very similar. Both are capital intensive industries. Both are technology intensive industries. Both have regulatory frameworks, and therefore they begin to connect the dot, and that's where you get as a client, you get an insight, you get an aha. Good professionals are great listeners, and this came out loud and clear in practically every interview that we did. They hear what you mean, not necessarily what you say, because quite often the client is not willing to reveal everything in words. You have to watch their body language to understand what they really mean rather than what they say. The next quote is much more interesting to me, and I have experienced that as a board member of large companies. I find fascinating when we bring consultants, whether those are compensation experts or those are mergers and acquisition people or those are strategy consultants. I find fascinating. They always come with an agenda. So last bullet point on this page is that our consultants always end up the session with a half-hour presentation on next steps, the execution of which, of course, cannot be accomplished without the consultants. Very typical thing I have seen. I also find that most of these consultants get together night before in the hotel and reshuffle the deck of PowerPoint presentation slides, which are usually not numbered, and then they reshuffle and prepare something just about late, almost like close to midnight, and in the morning the lead person who is a partner, usually in a typical professional services company, makes a presentation. In fact, I found fascinating, more often than not, they don't even know the client situation or the group dynamics. They don't even know how to listen to the body language of the board of directors and what are the body language signals they are giving to each other. So that's very key. First point is, it is very tough finding honest brokers who are unbiased and not pushing their own agenda with you. Everybody walks in here wanting something. And I found fascinating that many CEOs that I have a one-on-one relationship have said Jag, which is how they call me, like in Jaguar, that's my nickname. As soon as somebody walks in the door, I know they have an agenda because it's very obvious. It's body language. You don't have to speak. It just comes through. The air is breathing that you are here asking for money. You are asking for favor. And they turn themselves off completely, or they become very cautious and very guarded about the way they will listen to the message. So let's go through the journey. In this particular case, I wanted to point out that here is the way one can add value for clients as we go of a journey from a expert for hire to a steady supplier to ultimately breaking into a very tough area called trusted advisor. I have plotted this on two dimensions. The first one is, are you providing expertise or insight? And by the way, this is becoming very relevant even for large data gathering companies. Everybody is looking for insights, consumer insights, for example. When you have all these data, customer databases in large telephone companies, especially mobile telephone companies or utility companies or banks, where you have a direct account relationship, or you go through Nielsen or IRI type scanner data, people are looking for insights more and more, not just numbers to say what has happened, etc., historical things. They would like to see, what do you see in the data? Is there a pattern? Is there something that I can get an aha? Trusted advisors are a lot more offering insight, whereas experts primarily offer expertise. Second dimension is task versus collaboration. In other words, are you primarily just performing a task which is asked of you to do as a professional service provider, whether you are a medical doctor, whether you are a lawyer, or whether you are an accountant, or anybody, any professional service you can think about, or are you actually doing collaborative work with a client, co-discovering solutions, contextualizing the solution, working with the client as if you are a part of the client organization. I found, by the way, this very interesting. There are two types of consulting. One is what I call the physician way of consulting, where it says, if you have a pain and an ache, come to me, which means the patient only comes when he or she is sick, not when they are well. Then the physician's view is that, all right, let me hear your problem, look at the symptoms, and then I will give you a prescription for medication, which basically is to subside the symptoms, but not necessarily the cure. And by the way, what I recommended to you, I would not explain to you. It is basically in my database. Next time you are sick, you come back to me again. Whereas educator model of consulting is just the reverse. It is like saying, let me part with my knowledge, which is what professors, educators do. You as a client, like a student, can improvise on that one, contextualize, customize to your own needs, and eventually you learn so much from me as an educator, you don't need me at all. That's the second model of consulting. I found that the trusted advisors tend to be in the second model, that they educate the client, they provide the insight, and basically they're saying, you don't need me for the long term. Ironically, the more they do that thing, the more client has other problems where they invite the same consultant again and again. There are some management consultant friends I have who actually have transcended 3 generations of long-term leadership in large companies such as General Electric. Working with Reginald Jones, then comes Jack Welch as the new CEO, working with Jack Welch, and then working with Jeffy Mult now, for example. Most of these consultants do not do straight consulting. They're more educators. They organize workshops and transformation programs. So the next generation of leadership are actually their students, just like they do in their university. They already bonded with them in a very different level and a very different way, not like saying, I'm hiring you as an expert and here is the fee, etc. It is a different way of looking at a relationship. And they continue the journey of influence influencing, advising, motivating, encouraging them to perform in their leadership role. So that's a key difference. There are two dimensions between the client value zone. How do you create value for the clients, essentially? As I mentioned earlier, the key difference between experts versus trusted advisor is two-dimensional. One dimension has to do whether you are offering just expertise or you are offering insight. And the other dimension has to do whether you are just performing the task or you are collaborating with clients. This, I think, is a very fundamental difference. And this really borders the same way as what I earlier mentioned between the physician way of consulting or advising versus the educator approach to consulting and advising. I like the educator approach personally, where your whole goal is to take a pride in a client who took your knowledge and did far better implementation than you would have ever imagined. You get a sense of satisfaction, just like when a student performs very well after graduation, especially our doctoral students who go out and become world famous scholars in their own right. You get a tremendous sense of gratitude and a sense of fulfillment, and that is what this trusted advisors is all about. When you read their biographies, you get absolutely inspired by what they have done and what they achieved and how much they contributed toward the individual, either a monarch or a government or whatever it is. Very fascinating. So the next chart that I'm showing you shows you the value-added activities as people migrate from being expert for hire to becoming a trusted advisor. The lowest level, of course, is just supply information, and its value add is primarily access to information, collecting the information, aggregating the information, and often clients don't know in that specific area of expertise, whether it's law, medicine, as we have been talking about, or banking. Now you add a little more where you provide knowledge, not just information, where you are codifying, analyzing, and actually structuring the knowledge so that it's a readable report. And this is done by management consultants pretty regularly in terms of what they do, the fact finding, or in the beginning what they will call as design and analysis, as they call it. The next one is a higher level where now you begin to offer insights. In order to do that, you must have offer the breadth of knowledge, synthesize and use frameworks, and also apply some judgment, which is some recommendations that you are making, which are probably not traditional things that anybody will see, but something that's more meaningful. And the last stage is that you really are becoming the educator, which is what I mentioned. The educator model of consulting is closer to the trusted advisor, and the physician model of consulting is closer to the expert for hire. So here you are actually mentoring the organization, mentoring the leader in the company or a group of young leaders that are about to be becoming significantly responsible people in large enterprises. And it does not have to be limited for-profit companies. This is equally appropriate for government advising as well as NGO, large NGO advising. It's the same phenomenon. You assess the progress on which the client is going through. In other words, you have set them on a course or a journey, and you have milestones, and you are the ones who are saying, are you doing this? Are you doing this, etc.? For example, as we do through a whole semester of worth of teaching a class, we do the same thing. Students have midterm exams, students have certain research reports they do, students have a final exam, and there's a graduation. But the milestones and the deadlines are put by the professor, not by the client, which is very important. Whereas in a general expert for hire, client puts deadline on the professional service company, for example, and we perform as professional service advisors or professional services people accordingly. So here it is the supplier who is putting deadlines on the client to get things done, especially implementation or execution or whatever you want to do. They put a sense of urgency, and they exercise client selectivity. Most trusted advisors don't pick up all the clients because they are not primarily interested from the viewpoint of making money per se. They're much more interested in making a difference, and therefore they tend to be very selective in the clients, which is half the battle in my view, because if you have the right client that you assess properly where you will make a difference, then you do make a difference. Interesting logic, is right? So let me now show you in the next chart what we did. There's a book written here by Andrew Sobel, my colleague, and myself. Andrew comes from the consulting background. I come from the education background, and we collaborated on a book that's called Clients for Life and did all the research, and we found ultimately that there are 7 traits traits or 7 attributes of great advisors. So it's very much like the 7 good habits of effective people. But this is focused on becoming a trusted advisor. So I will now go through each one of them in a quick summary fashion and suggest what each attribute means. And obviously, you can do the self-assessment. You can imagine yourself, if you are a very successful trusted advisor, you know that these messages are reinforcing. If you are primarily an expert for hire, you know these are the things you need to do to become a trusted advisor. The 7 are, first one is empathy. Do you care for client and their interest, or are you more interested in your interest? The key skill set is listening. I will come to that in some depth in a moment. But this has been a major criticism right now with all of the hedge fund managers. Whose interest are you really looking for? Are you looking for your interest as hedge fund manager or client's interest? Is it a win-win or is it a win-loss? Very key issue around here. Second one has to do with integrity. And integrity is coming and builds trust. So again, we'll go in some depth. Third one is what I call selfless independence, which means that you are independent of the client and you are not actually servant to the client. And you don't look at the money as a dependence on the client, essentially some form of a compensation. You are not an employee. You are an independent advisor, and client want that out of trusted advisor. Next one, point number 4 is, are you a deep generalist? As I mentioned earlier, most experts are very deep, but they don't have breadth of knowledge. The more specialized you are within a discipline, within a profession, the less generalist you will be. Generalists, on the other hand, don't have the depth or expertise, and therefore the ideal combination is becoming a deep generalist. Number 5 is big picture thinking. Are you able to think more? In other words, just as the saying says, are you able to see the forest for the trees? Are you able to connect the dots? Are you able to question and pretty much ask the question why all the time and somehow synthesize the knowledge? So around here, synthesis is a very key skill set. If you don't have that thing, can you learn and acquire that? Then judgment. And judgment has become pretty important in recent days, given the political tensions between nations, for example, a lot of civil strife that's taking place worldwide, the whole diversity debate that goes on within corporations, within society by and large, with all the social media inflammation, making the right judgment is becoming much more necessary, both for the client as well as for you. So are you a good judge of making the right decisions? Do you have that judgment capability? Clients are looking for you. And the last one, of course, is what is your power of conviction? What are your values? So great advisors, trusted advisors, seem to have these 7 attributes. And you can assess yourself if you want it. But this is basically, my job here is to just show you what each attribute means, and you can go on a journey. What is empathy? You know what issues and concerns keep your clients awake at night, which means you are awake at night worrying about your clients' issues. Empathy is a very key dimension. It's caring, it's compassion. And among all the great leaders, that is one of the key successful factors to becoming a great leader. There are 3 elements of great leaders: passion, empathy, and competence or experience. While we measure everything from a competency viewpoint, what one needs is more than competency. It needs both passion and it needs empathy or caring or compassion. So that's what this is all about. Do you have that caring attitude about who you serve? You do twice as much listening as talking. The second point that comes about. So one key dimension of empathy is listening skills. You and your clients enjoy spending time with each other and they routinely confide in you. Again, as we talked about earlier, as a trusted advisor, the relationship now is both professional and personal, not just professional. Second area, have you developed your clients' trust? Trust can only come from integrity, and as the trait of great advisors is absolute integrity. Clients' trust in you extends beyond their belief that you will do a good work. That's just like hiring for expertise. It is a deeper, broader trust based on both professional competence and personal integrity. And my view is that personal integrity matters enormously, and this is where clients have all kinds of insecurities about confiding too much in the relationship, whether you are an estate planning lawyer, for example, or whether you are a litigation lawyer, or whether you are a divorce lawyer. Makes no difference. Personal integrity as a professional service provider, very key to maintaining the relationship with the client. There is a quality of openness to your client relationship. Both you and your clients feel free to bring up touchy and awkward subjects with each other. In other words, you are now able to to pretty much blur the boundaries in terms of the things you will chat and discuss with each other. More like a friendship in many ways. The third key skill set is, do you practice detached commitment, or what we have labeled in the book as selfless independence? How do you manifest this thing? This is manifested where you don't hold back your opinion. If you have a point of view on an issue of importance to your clients, you find a way to communicate. It doesn't mean you do it in a negative way or in an obnoxious way. It is actually doing it in a firm way, but in a constructive way. You have on occasion turned down assignments or terminated a client relationship. And I find trusted advisors are very selective, and if they made a mistake and they know client is using them for his or her own political agenda, they begin to distance from the client. What is detached commitment or selfless independence? It means maintaining a balance between dedication to the clients and at the same time being honest with yourself. Remember, I gave the journey about trusted advisors. In the monarchy days, you had great theologians who became trusted advisors, like the name Aristotle and Plato. When the democracies came, monarchy was thrown out. Lawyers became great advisors. And then when the Industrial Revolution came, and what became a mercantile economy essentially, where trade and commerce were dominant in the minds of governments, then you have great bankers became advisors. One of the bankers behaved like that is J.P. Morgan. His biography is very fascinating to read. He transcended above and beyond just giving money or capital for a given industry, but he actually engaged as a company and as a person into additional value-add activities. So that's clearly one examples. And in recent times, we have all admired Peter Drucker as a great management thinker, probably one of the best in the world, but at the same time being a very good advisor to companies. There are three types of independence or honesty. Either way, I think it's independence. One is, do you have intellectual independence? That means, in this case, are you really honest about your views, or do you want to compromise your views on a given matter for the sake of pleasing the client? Second one is emotional independence. That's very important because quite often you can get the client's problems come to you. I've heard for many young consultants in the 80s and the 90s when they began to do re-engineering the corporation, and actually as a consultants they are hired to automate more things and permanently let go the workforce, and often when they come home they cannot sleep themselves. Client's agony comes to you, and there is a boundary with which you have a detached. Probably the medical profession trains you how to very well, because you may have a hospice patient or you may have a young child with cancer, and how do you deal with that patient, and that relationship becomes very key, where there's a boundary where the patient doesn't become part of you. You have to remain independent of the patient. And the last one, of course, is financial independence, which says that cultivate a mindset of independent wealth, that you will not work for money, but money will comes along pretty much as a measure of your success. It's not the goal, but it is just a matrix with which you are measuring yourself. Goal is much higher, and that is to make a difference. Are you a deep generalist, which is the next attribute? And that comes from a sense of keen observation. You find something interesting about everyone you meet and every situation you encounter, which means you are a permanent learner, and you are very egalitarian as to where you learn from. It is not as if going only to a well-reputed university is the place to learn. It is not as if you will learn from more senior colleagues, or you will learn from elders. You learn from peers, you learn from juniors, you learn from everybody. Everybody has something to offer you. And therefore, the second message is the one that I really like. That's my favorite saying. Again, one of those Oriental sayings. When a student is ready, the teacher will show up. Very important. If you are not ready to learn, teacher can do nothing. So when a student is ready, the teacher will show up also means teacher does not have to be a formal role assigned person. The teacher can be nature, teacher can be rocks, teacher can be animals, teacher can be wildlife, teacher can be animal. So if you are ready to learn, and that's the attribute that great trusted advisors all are, they're just obsessed for learning from anything, from everybody, and they acquire a vast knowledge, and then they connect the dots for their clients in a specific situation. Client asks for your advice and respect your judgment about issues that extend beyond your core professional expertise. Client clients also have figured out that you are not just a lawyer, an accountant, or a strategy consultant, or an IT service provider, but you are more than that. I mean, that you give, but you can add more than that. That's the whole point around here, right? Next trait is, are you a big picture thinker? So you not only like to collect facts and analyze them, but you really ask always the question, why? It's like that innocent child who always says, why? Sometimes looks like pestering almost. Now you have no answer. That makes you uncomfortable, but you are very curious about why. You are interested in explaining a phenomenon, not just describing the phenomenon. And that goes to a next level of intellectual capability. You like to summarize and crystallize the key issues inherent in any client situation, which means you come to a point very quickly and you are able to synthesize in a way, framing the whole thing, client immediately gets it. Often, therefore, you get comments from your clients such as, now I see, aha, that puts it in perspective. I see the relationship, or that's a good way of putting it. They will often repeat what you have said and even use your language as they explain to others. In other words, what most people don't have is to rise above facts and figures into an insight, into an aha, into a language and a phrase with which you can actually rally lots of facts and figures, which is why some of the bestseller books are so simple, but they have that one message that synthesizes everything. For example, tipping point, or for example, cognitive dissonance. There are many concepts like that where the simplicity of the concept, but is really the richness of the concept at the same time. Einstein's equation, very simple, but it summarizes the whole universe properly. That's the kind of a message. That's what you are all about if you can do this thing. Next area is, do you have eye for winners? Great judgment. When your clients face tough choices, they often use you as a sounding board. They share the dilemmas with you. And more corporations are going through these tough decisions in this great economic recession of 2008, the European Euro crisis, mergers and acquisitions, antitrust issues as it is happening right now, industry consolidation, just goes on, where you have fundamental dilemmas and the choices to make as a client, and you are asking, in fact, the advisor to provide you a judgment, a recommendation, whether you should go left or you should go right. This is also very true in politics. Great advisors recommend what strategy and what course of action the political candidate should engage for them to get re-elected. You are right more than 70% of the times. If you have historically made recommendations and judgments, you can analyze them over time and say, was I right or wrong? It is like a Monday morning quarterback in many ways, but that analysis is very helpful because it builds your own confidence that you can actually you have the skill set to have good judgment. You have the confidence to make judgments relatively quickly. Great advisors do not get paralyzed by analysis. You identify and marshal your experiences and your perspective rather than get paralyzed by analysis. Next area, and the last one, is, do you have power of conviction, which is anchored to values. You feel a sense of mission as you pursue your career, which is a passion rather than an obligation or a vocation. Your financial compensation is important to you, but it doesn't drive your choice of work. It's a key difference. If a client asks what is important to you as an individual and as a professional, your answers are immediate and clear. You know what your core beliefs and values are. You feel and project a passion and energy when you talk. As I mentioned earlier, the three characteristics of great advisors, like three characteristics of great leaders, is the same thing, or great teachers, is enthusiasm or passion, empathy or caring, and expertise or competence. While most experts for hire are very competent, what we need are the other two dimensions, and the 7 attributes and a skill set that you develop around there makes you now a more holistic person, and therefore a very strong leader as over client. Essentially, you lead the client. You are a thought leader. So let me summarize this presentation about how to become a trusted advisor. Professional services companies are transforming from expert for hire to either vendors or trusted advisors. If you are going to go on the vendor side, my recommendation would be very simple. Make sure you have lots and lots of automation. Everything is online. Client meetings are not even face-to-face. It's all by email, whatever the modern technology will allow. Using social media, etc., then you can be a good vendor. But if you want to be a trusted advisor, which is the other side, you'll have to go through this journey. And as a managing director of a company, for example, this is a very tough process with which you'll have to convince many people in your your organization that they are not likely to become trusted advisors, which means their career plateaus and they may not become partners. They may be good associates, they may be good senior associates, they may be good executives, but to become a partnership is a club of very unique set of individuals who have a complete holistic relationship with their clients as trusted advisors. I've seen that, by the way, in some consultancy organizations with some of the partners. I've seen definitely this lot more among ad agencies and their clients, and especially by the creative people more so than by the media people, for example. The main reason to develop client loyalty, you must deliver value as well as client satisfaction. As I showed you the numbers earlier, it is not just enough to have client satisfaction. Client must also feel like they're getting value from you, and the data were unfortunately so negative. 47% of the clients neither get value nor they get satisfaction, and therefore that relationship is at risk, as we talked about earlier. The main reason for sustaining client loyalty is to keep the best interest of clients in my mind, in your mind. I think this is a very key point, and the only way one can look upon this one is to do the lifetime value of a client, which is actually much greater than we have realized. Trusted advisors ask great questions, they are great listeners, and they're usually deep generalists. They tend to be purpose-driven and have impeccable integrity. I want to add one more point, that as I began to read those biographies and began to talk about living great trusted advisors, which is a small elite set of people, I found one thing in common among all of them. They all had gone through a major adversity in their own life when they were growing up. Fortunately, they survived, but that built a character, and that character was the foundation on whatever they did, whether they were surgeons, whether they were lawyers, whether they were investment bankers, or whether they were management consultants. It's the same thing. All these great advisors, political government advisors, to corporate management advisors, to advisors for community activists, for example, they all had the same trait. They had gone through some adversity in their life at a relatively young age. Fortunately, they survived and became far superior human beings in terms of contributing value back.
Thanks for joining us for this lecture on how to become a trusted advisor with Professor Jagdish Sheth. For more about Professor Sheth and the Sheth Leadership Academy, visit www.shethleadershipacademy.com.